Welcome back to Design for Impact. Today we're going to be talking about preparing to facilitate, and we're going to look at a couple of things. I think the first thing is like the logistics of it, and then the second thing is really how do you like bring people and make sure that you've designed the space and the sessions in a way that's inclusive. So, story time. When COVID hit, I was working for this government agency in Australia, and they're responsible for a lot of the government services and payments. And obviously, because a lot of people lost their jobs, the Australian government rallied to put out a lot of payments and stuff to help almost sustain the economy or make sure people have food on the table and things like that. And the problem is like all of the processes that we typically relied on were pretty long. They relied on physical interactions, right? Like facilitating physical spaces and things like that. And then all of a sudden when COVID hit, there was like this almost like emergency, right? To make sure people understand what services they can apply for and what payments they can get and stuff like that. But at the same time, we were in our houses, like each person was in their home working from home. I remember distinctly one process we were running was basically bringing lots of different business areas in this government department together to talk about what it is that they need to put on the website. And this website was getting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hits every day, to talk about what content they would put on the website and how they would frame it and make sure that it's legal and things like that. And typically that process would take 8 weeks. And I remember trying to design this session, and because everyone was working from home, they didn't have access to like their typical corporate equipment, right? Say Skype or the equivalent. Some people didn't have mics or anything. They just, had a phone and an internet connection. And the trouble with that was we couldn't really find one platform that would like help us facilitate this session, right? There was no equivalent of Zoom. So that's the story. I'll share a bit more about what we ended up doing later on. But I want you to have a think about what you would do in a situation where you can't rely on something like Zoom or Skype or anything to facilitate a virtual conversation. All right. Last week's challenge, if you were here, we're talking about practicing applying your facilitation skills at home or at work, and then reflecting on what you learned and what was difficult. Does anyone want to share?
I can. I was the office I work out of, co-working space, was doing a kind of a shared lunch thing, and it's been over Zoom, unfortunately, but it's also a good practice in working with Zoom. I've been really excited about improv. I think I talked about it maybe last week, but I just gave a speech on improv in the workplace, and improv is a tool for facilitation. And then I facilitated an improv game. There was supposed to be like a question and answer period, but instead of that, we just played improv game. Yeah, I did my homework accidentally, to be honest. What did I learn? I haven't actually given a speech in a long time. You just got to practice a speech. It's material that I know quite well and I'm comfortable with. And I just was I was reading off a script and quite guilty, even though I know the material and I'm quite comfortable with it. So practice. And it reestablished for me the power of teaching as a way of integrating, teaching and facilitating as a way of integrating and understanding. I'm really also learning with that in inclusivity. I don't think, especially with things like improv, I think I used to really just want to play with people who were quite open and willing already, but learning to bring people up to a comfortable level from wherever they're starting, and realizing that there's all sorts of ways. You don't have to throw somebody into improv and say, okay, you're this character and it's this kind of scene and go like that. Most people don't want to do that, and that's fine. That's great. They can start wherever.
So like looking for progress over a specific like outcome that everyone needs to meet, or like measuring success by one single outcome. That's cool. I like
Yeah,
that.
that's a great way to phrase it.
What about you, Carl? Or Kuldeep, if you have reflections as well. I know you weren't here last week.
Not much. Been doing much except for giving interviews.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So I haven't gotten a chance to really roll this out yet, but was able to do a teaser actually today, finally, after talking about this for a bit. So we're planning a bigger workshop, but I talked a lot about a courteous conflict in the last session, and had a conversation today. We're still in the sort of problem framing phase, and was able to, in Mural, as people were describing the problem, sketch out this sort of network diagram of what the problem looked like. And it was great. I was listening and putting it together. And so I knew it was going to be just a dirty sketch, and it was going to be a little bit wrong. In fact, I was probably a little bit careless the way that I put it together. But then immediately afterwards, brought everybody into the Mural session, which if you guys don't know Mural, it's almost the same exact thing as Miro, but a little bit more confined, but a little bit easier to operate because it's got less options. So threw them into the Mural session, and immediately they start, no, that's wrong. You have to fix this. And they're correcting my work. And then they start, no, he got it right. That works like that. No, you didn't hear about it. Like now that conflict is starting. I didn't even have to preface anything with, I want to encourage conflict in this space, and here are the rules for engagement, and everybody respect each other. None of that, but it worked because we had set the tone in our conversation early for just how we wanted to operate, and then it just naturally took over. So I want to use that model going forward. It might be a little bit different when it transitions from a 1 hour conversation to a dedicated 4 hour, okay, we're going to get into this Mural board and dig into it. So there's a lot more to understand, but there was definitely a lot of progress there, and it worked, because basically you had 3 people huddling around this and arguing through it. And then at the end of the day, they were all able to back away and go, okay, I think that looks good for now. I think we're all aligned, and we came up with something that we're happy with. Perfect. That was the objective.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I feel like, because I used to do that a lot as well, like in physical sessions where you draw something on the whiteboard and all of a sudden the conversation like stops going around in circles and focuses on the visual thing that everyone can refer to as like their shared understanding of what's happening or what they're trying to achieve, which I think is like a super powerful tool. Like even just seeing or trying to translate someone's thoughts into a picture that makes sense. I think that's super powerful for us as facilitators, and also and designers, and for them as well. So that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, it works.
I love that as a working example of a lot of the lesson in design is like a focus on action and doing it, that there's no wrong in the design process. And it sounds like a great example of that. It doesn't matter really what you sketched out. It created that conversation very strongly, and then that can be edited later and changed by the people in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think I said it last week too. There's a big idea around design thinking where conversation is fine, but you want evidence around it, and you want to give everybody the opportunity to talk. So you can't just have this exchange of one person talking at a time and have it be really fruitful. So if everybody's putting information on Post-its or putting it into a physical space, now we have evidence and we have things to collect around or manipulate in the physical space until it starts to make sense. And that is much, much more powerful than just a bunch of us sitting around a conversation, a table meeting and trying to align.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Just thinking about like visual facilitation as a way of doing that. One of the quotes I wanted to share with you is Werner Meyer's. I don't think I completely agree with it. I think it can be pushed a lot further, but the quote says, diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance. And just a personal example, like me and Marina, when we were getting married, we sent like maybe 400 invites. And you can imagine, not 400 invites, but invites to 400 people. And you can imagine, like, we obviously like had priorities, right? Like, you care more about your family than your friends. You care more about like your closer friends than friends that you haven't seen in 5 years, and you care more about family than extended family and things like that. And I think that's the idea with this quote, is like, you can send invites to lots of people, but who do you really care about? And how do you show that care? And I think we'll talk about a couple of pitfalls with just asking people to dance, because I think it's nice, I think, and it could be sentimental, but I think we can, as designers, I think we have the sort of obligation to go a bit further. Any reflections on that quote? Have you come across it? Anything like that?
I love dancing, so any analogy about dancing sounds fun. But, and maybe this is some of the limitations that you're speaking of, but being asked to dance is really a more or less a personal thing, that as a facilitator, you can only ask so many people to dance, unless you're talking about like a jig, like traditional collars. But I don't know. Yeah, it's not really inclusive per se.
Yeah, gotcha. So it's like more one-on-one than many to many.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think as well, what I was thinking about with this is, what if the person doesn't like dancing, right? Or what if the person likes dancing, just not to that music? You've almost made this engagement like black and white for them. You either fit into our model or you don't, which, yeah, we'll talk about a bit more. So if you read the first paper that we're talking about in week 1, they've got like certain principles. Today, the focus will be really on the bottom principles, which are almost like the ingredients that you have in the cake, yeah, or on this session. The principles that good designers should be following to make sure the session's designed in a helpful way, it's inclusive, it brings the right people together. And then the top half is almost like the cherry on top. So first reflection piece, we want to hear from you. What do you think you need to prepare in order to facilitate a session? What are the types of things that you need to have, or you need to create or prepare before you design a session? So what we might do is, I might play some music, just take a couple of minutes reflecting individually, and then we will chat about it. Can you hear the music? All right. I think people are starting to look like they're finished. Yeah, keen to hear your thoughts. Who wants to go?
So for me, I like to partner with somebody, because I'm an extroverted intuitive. I'm out there in outer space all day long, and I'm not good at things with like agendas and organizing things. I work with a lot of people that are really good at that, and they love doing that. So I'll usually partner with one of those people. Like our design researchers are amazing at that stuff. So I split this into kind of 2 things. On the more tactile side, we'll need something like an agenda. There's materials. We'll use butcher paper and stick that up on the walls for building maps, and if we need whiteboards, if we need flip books, all that kind of stuff. Props, we will do props for whatever, icebreakers, for like food, events, that kind of like weird stuff. So food's another one, and space. We definitely need the right space. And there's something strategic to that, about getting everybody out of their comfort zone and into a space where they can, I don't know, be freely creative, but out of the usual cycle. What I like to focus on is the more strategic stuff. So I like to at least have a picture of the problem space, but maybe not the definition of the problem. That should have room to form itself. We need a roster. So I need to understand who's impacted. I don't like a firm objective, but there has to be some sort of purpose for us getting together. I think there should be principles established for what we're doing during our time there. I like setting a tone for our time there. That has to do with the space sometime, but I love playing music during the events. It's how often we break things up, the kind of food that we order, like all that kind of stuff. And if there's any kind of research or pre-work that needs to be done going into this, like making sure that it's done so that we're not sitting there saying, oh, we didn't invite this person, so we've hit our wall, or we don't know the answers to these, and so let's just put a big question mark there, and then we'll do another workshop next month when we can all get together again. So trying to make sure that as much of that is buttoned up as possible.
That's awesome. That's pretty exhaustive, and I really agree with your sentiment about understanding what it is that you're good at and what you need someone else to do for you. Because I think design is like inherently a team sport, and I was reflecting about this when I was watching soccer yesterday, and I was thinking like, I guess I have some uncomfortability around like the idea of saying like I can do these things and not these things. But then I was thinking about it, and it's, say a goalkeeper, you don't expect them, or you don't necessarily want them to practice scoring goals. Sure, they might be able to score a goal here and there, but it's not their responsibility to score a goal, versus an attacker who's not expected to save goals, but they might do it every now and then. Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, thank you. I had to initially think like need, potentially not a lot of these things. Certainly a skilled, like part of the skill of facilitation is the ability to take very little and do good things with that, because if you're not given any information, a good facilitator can build a framework and build all these things that are necessary with participants. But certainly lots of all the things that Kyle mentioned, that was a great list of things that are helpful. One thing that I got here was like, what are the traditional normal ways that the group functions? That's always good to know. It's good to often break that, but you need to understand how the group functions in order to shake that up properly. I like a strong intention and focus, and I mean that in a sort of moment-to-moment personal sense. If something gets heated and I need to work with that, it's not a focus of, oh, the CEO said this thing needs to happen at the end of this meeting. It's a focus of, I knew that this person is really heated on this topic before I come in. So like just setting an intention of keeping tensions at minimum, or keeping like happiness high, and it changes, and just really grounding and setting a personal intention for how I want the field to be, and what I need to do to maintain that. Yeah, space considerations, definitely as much research into the background of the issue as possible. Sometimes it can be an advantage to not know too much in certain ways. And yeah, stakeholders, I loved the consideration of partner, and that's definitely an understanding of what I'm good at and other people are good at, but also just physically space holding. I didn't even put that on my list, but I love that you said that, because working with a partner is, whoa, this thing is occurring. What you feel that, and I'll stay with the main group, or whatever it is, will always come up. And oh, I got to run out for this thing. I'll be right back. You got it. So yeah, that is actually a huge something that I believe in. So yeah.
Yeah, I've done groups of 45 people before, 50 people, and I couldn't have done it without a partner or three at that point, because it's just too many to corral. But
yeah,
you mentioned something awesome that I completely left off the list that you reminded me of, that I probably don't do a very good job of, and don't have to be too sensitive of, because I'm getting people together within the corporate structure, and we've got a good amount of transparency, and we've got mechanisms for this. But I think in any other scenario, you said understanding how groups operate, there's like an accessibility of consideration of, I was talking to somebody about doing community design for the VA hospital, the Veterans Hospital. Can I have a bunch of veterans doing a 4-hour session walking around whiteboards, or do I have disabilities to deal with? Do I have people that have limited capabilities where they can't be standing around for 4 hours? I think those are, or do I have like vision impaired people, or like, that's probably something that you probably need to identify when you need to understand your group. Also, like simple stuff like, I'm going to order food for everybody, so we're all going to have roast beef sandwiches. I didn't realize there were people that couldn't eat roast beef, and all the dietary restrictions and all, the gluten and all that kind of stuff. So like, there's a lot of that to really understand who your audience is, to set up that sort of safe space also.
That's really interesting, talking about space. I was listening to this video. I think it was Dave Snowden. He was talking about how they did a study, and they looked at like the impact of light on productivity. And they said when there was more sunlight, people were more productive. And then what they didn't realize is it wasn't about having more sunlight. It was actually about the change, right? Like people needed the change. So sometimes, like when we used to run physical workshops, I will bring especially like after say lunch or something, like where people feel a bit lethargic and heavy, I'll change either from like blinds up or blinds down, just give them a different thing to deal with and get energized by. Which, yeah, it's like, just, I don't know, it's cool. You feel like you're a little manipulator.
The Hawthorne Effect.
Sorry?
It's called the Hawthorne Effect. People respond to novelty.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Yeah, what I'll do, because we're in multiple locations, my partners, we're in Richmond, we're in Washington, D.C., we're in Chicago, we're in Toronto, or we're in Dallas. When I'm setting up these workshops, nobody's working remotely. Like, we'll just randomly, all right, everybody's traveling to Chicago for this one, or we're all going to Toronto for this one. And there are a few people that are in their comfort zone because we have to travel to their place. But if it's 20 people getting together, usually at least 15 of them are now traveling. And so people get energized by traveling and going to new places. And then we get some of that, like, all right, we're all going out to get dinner together afterwards. And there's all that sort of extracurricular kind of fun stuff that happens as well. But even when that doesn't happen, I'm finding some of my coworkers, what they'll do is retreats just to get us out of the building and the campus. We'll rent a conference room at a hotel, and maybe we'll do it like an hour away. We'll go into the mountains and find a resort and just get a hotel room and not be in our usual building, and be on our laptops and on Slack, talking to people, doing our work while we're multitasking, not really trying to do this session as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that we should be mindful of, I think, is a lot of people have a very like specific preferred way of organizing the space, right? Like usually it's, especially for designers, usually it's like round tables with like 6 to 8 chairs, and that's good, but that's not always the answer. If you need to make a decision, having that sort of space isn't helpful, whereas if you try and collaborate, that space is helpful. Anyway, just things to keep mindful of. All right, Kuldeep, over to you. What are your thoughts?
I really agree with the space part. I think like recently when I was doing my master's, Melbourne was in lockdown, and a lot of like international students, they were kind of the newcomers in Australia. They just landed in Australia and got locked down, and they basically didn't have a lot of people to talk to. They were like into a new land and just completely inside a room. So I'm just trying to relate this thing with what I did. Just because I was here, I knew like how the culture works in Australia and what things are there outside. And so we were just trying to help the newcomers to settle down. So being someone who like completed 1 year of the university, and then I knew, where these guys can find the exact the right help. So I started doing some online sessions and trying to get people on a video call where they can basically talk and let us know what their problems are. Just like they are new in the city and if they need some help. So just basically trying to keep some conversations so they don't really feel mentally. Yeah, it was just too much last year. So along with a few people, like we try to facilitate this entire session, but the students were not. Yeah, like then it comes down to space. In the session, not everyone's like really comfortable talking about their real issues. They just need, maybe sometimes they need more space, more than 5 minutes to think about their problems. So what we really did, we were like, hey, we are opening this Instagram page. This is how it works. We were explaining them entirely on the Zoom session, and y'all can get back to us. Let us know what you feel, if you need any food vouchers or some sort of other help, please let us know. So it just, after 1 or 2 sessions, we didn't really get any response. But the moment we opened up an offline page and gave them more space to think about what they really need, so we started getting small problems. Hey, I don't think I get along with this professor. Hey, I think we need something else. So it's just about sometimes just trying to understand. Yeah, like immediately you won't get the answers, but yeah, you need to be prepared to expect certain things and really know that, okay, yeah, if you don't get the answers immediately, then what you can do like after that. Just like this was this example which I thought like, yeah, like I need, which kind of gave me this thing that, yeah, like you won't get answers immediately. If you need some answers, then you gotta try different ways.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting reflections on the importance or suitability of different types of spaces for engaging different types of people on different topics. So some things to consider, topics and things you'll do, obviously, that's it, obvious. What are we actually going to do in this session? Setting and managing expectations, I think it's really important, because I think often people have different expectations of the session, and if those expectations aren't met, then they're unhappy or they feel like it's a waste of time. One thing that we spoke about last week is designing an approach that helps everyone contribute individually and together, whether they're differently abled, whether they're vision impaired, whatever it is. And then using a space, like we said, I think, and like you all reflected, using a space that works for what it is that you need to achieve. Back to the story that I started, where you didn't have access to like corporate platforms or things like Zoom and Skype. What do you think you would do in that situation? Feel free to either share it out loud or take time to chew on it.
The mantra I've had since COVID has had us at home is meet people where they are. That's kind of spread on my team a lot, and so I think like we would find the margin and set that as our baseline. I'm not sure exactly where that would be, but then figure out what is actually going to work for us. That's what we had to do. I guess we all went home with Zoom, but not everyone had monitors at home at their disposal, or Bluetooth, or the right mic, or webcams. That was just the laptop and the laptop mic. And there are some people that have wonky internet because they're in rural areas or what have you. So we've had to arrest some of that, but there was, it was pretty much, we'll make resources available to everybody. But I think the starting point would be collect around the baseline.
That's cool. That's cool. In my head, I call it like the common denominator, the thing that everyone has access to. The one way that, regardless of what it is, what's the one way that it's not great, but it's something that will work for everyone. Awesome. Dan, Kuldeep, thoughts?
Yeah, it's not the scenario sort of mass sharing without some of the usual tools. It's not something I have experience with, but it's just another chance to experiment and be playful and creative. If it comes down to, I don't know, doing a YouTube live and collecting Twitter comments, or it's not great, but maybe it's something that works, and maybe there's some good things that can come out of whatever limitation of there's going to be a limitation with every platform, and some of the constraints might just bring something good, and being adaptable and willing to try. If you can't use some of the mainstream things, what are people on? Can people text in information? Or there's a lot of ways it can work, but just maintaining adaptable and creative and playful with it.
Yeah, very good principles, Dan. Kuldeep, thoughts?
I don't have on this one.
Okay, cool. So what we ended up doing was everyone stuck at their home. We ended up actually all coming together on the phone. So like the phone line was like the one thing that we could rely on. We used a tool called Group Map, and then we split up into groups. So basically what we used the phone for was to come together, and obviously the phone is like a one-to-one conversation. So it was mainly sort of me saying, okay, this is the activity that we're going to do next. Does anyone have any questions? And then if people ask questions, then we answered them. And then we would actually just mute on the phone, and then get teams to use whatever platforms that they had access to. Group Map is a bit like Miro or Mural, and basically work together as a team on a specific topic. You can see Kyle checking it out. And then basically what we also did, similar to what Kyle was referring to as well, was because we had 30 or 40 people on this like phone line, that one-to-one channel, we split up, right? So I assigned some facilitators that would act as facilitators within the groups. And then every 10 minutes we had different activity, and then we come back, share, realign, and then go out and come back in again, which worked really well. Consistently, the feedback was that it was one of the best sessions, even though the technology wasn't that great, which, like you say, then it's like at the end of the day, everything has its constraints. And it also allowed the teams to work together in a different way, and not just work together in a different way for this session, but almost change their 8-week process of working together, right? Where they email each other documents back and forth to say, here's what we think, no, this is what we think, etc., to 2 weeks, right? Where they went from, this is the thing that we need to develop content for, or this is the pages that we need to put up on the website about these specific government services or payments, to the content is actually live on the website. It's being tested. We've made sure people understand it. We made sure it's plain English, like super, super fast. And again, even though this might seem like a small thing, for someone, say, who's struggling to put food on the table or struggling to access government services or payments, having that 6-week, going from 8 weeks before I can understand what it is that the government can give me, to 2 weeks to understand what the government can give me, it's massive, right? Instead of going those 6 extra weeks without income, all of a sudden you have income for those 6 weeks. So coming back to diversity is being invited to the party, inclusions being asked to dance, I want you to have a think about like how you can push that further. So if we're saying it's not just about asking someone to dance, what could it be about? Does that make sense? Cool. That was a bad way of explaining it, but it made sense. So that's all that matters. So have a think about metaphors that you could apply to this thing. Oh, well, I have no idea. It's called Chill Instrumental Music on Spotify. Who wants to go? Cold Deep, do you want to go this time?
I just need a few seconds more.
All right, take your time. Who wants to go then? Come on.
I can go. This was great. I like this activity, analogy activity, really trying to think into use the game of like party facilitation mindset to think of how that can work in other settings. So yeah, it would be really starting out with asking what people need and want. It might not be dance, maybe it is dance, but really empathy. Starting with empathy and questioning, and specifically asking what also excites people, like a level beyond need and wants is what drives you? Maybe it's dance, that's great. Another way I looked at it was specifically connecting people with partners of like activity partners, let's say. If some people want to talk, if some people want to cook in the kitchen and eat and dance, some people want to dance, just really forming groups. I was thinking a lot about accessibility after Kyle was talking about accessibility, but like leading an accessible dance activity, if dance is what we're talking about. And then I took it another level of facilitation and actually finding someone who wants to lead something. Like a strong facilitator doesn't need to be in the front of everything. Finding someone who may be a better voice or a better facilitator or a better teacher to take that while if you are in the role of facilitator, still being able to manage the space and if the goal is inclusivity. And the thing I came up with is uniting people on common goals, like just finding with the research is really bringing people together and uniting people on common goals. So that's great. If the common goal is dance, then you can really play on that. And another thing that came up is it's related to accessibility, but I've done a lot of harm reduction work at festivals. Anybody's having a bad time for whatever reason, usually substance induced, but also just intense, just setting up a safety place, room, people, and that can in a like a traditional design business sense, that can still be thought about for people who will need like special care and attention if things get heated, or just even in staying up with what's going on, or special help. So just setting up a safety net for people who need that.
That's awesome. I really like the idea of having a safety net. So often when we run workshops or interviews with say someone who's unemployed or someone who's gone through a trauma that we're obviously conscious of, we'll have a psychologist on hand for them to talk to if anything that arises. Awesome. Thanks, Dan. I love the number of like things that you thought about just using this one metaphor. That's awesome. What about you, Carl?
So just to play on the quote there, said, inclusion is getting the invite. Diversity is having a very different party than you planned. Been kind of fighting this fight for a little while, because I think the sort of corporate ingestion, at least in America, of the idea of diversity is, I don't know if I was explaining this last week or the week before, stop me if I'm repeating myself, but this idea of, I will have this mosaic of different toned people from different places, and then we'll have achieved diversity and all will be well. And that's obviously superficial. That's entirely superficial. I've been working back from the end result and saying, if we actually have diversity, then that means we've respected the agency and the point of view of different people coming from different places. So we will, in effect, have change, and in unexpected ways, because we're now listening to things that we haven't listened to before. We're now introducing new ideas and points of view into a place that didn't have that previously. And so when we start seeing unexpected change, we'll have diversity.
Yeah, and that almost talks to like the idea of organizational change isn't just about the organization is an abstract concept, right? It won't change if the people within it don't have like a personal change.
Yeah, if it's just the faces, and then we teach everybody to just sing the corporate slogans and agree with everybody else all day long, like how deep is that diversity really worth at the end of the day? We're losing the real riches.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kyle. Kuldeep?
Yeah, I was just thinking on the same line that if inclusion is inviting everyone, then like I was thinking on a line that if I'm throwing a party, then I'm asking him, yeah, like I would ask everyone to dance, but then I would also try to create some different activities which they can be part of if they don't want to dance. So or else like if I'm a vegetarian, then I would make sure that people coming to the party would also have their preferred options. So I just thought like thinking on different grounds is something something it really fascinates me.
Yeah, and something so small, but I've been in lots of workshops where people are like, where's like my meal? Like I've told you my dietary requirements, why isn't my meal here? And it's sometimes I have stepped back and be like, how important is this thing? But I think it's like it's a symbol, right, of like how much you care about this person attending and how comfortable you want to make them feel. Absolutely. So the last thing we want to talk about is how to bring people into the space who are usually left out, because I think we all, regardless of what the topic is, you'll have like common suspects that everyone's, oh, these people need to attend. They typically have louder voices, or their opinions are more opinionated, or they have more to share, or seemingly more expertise and things like that. So some of the questions that we can ask, I think, and I've been listening to the importance, or a couple of things about the importance of questions, but some things to ask are like, who are they? Who are those people that are usually left out? Kyle, I think last week talked about how might this impact them? Like, how can we identify the people by talking about what impact this thing might have? What do they need in order to engage? What the barriers are they're facing in order to engage, especially say with like Indigenous people or groups who have historically been in conflict, whether that's like actual conflict or a psychological conflict, so to speak. And then how can we design the session to help them contribute? And I think it's really important to understand that we want to design the session to help them contribute, not force them to contribute, if that makes sense. There's a difference. Like as designers, we're never going to have, or we should never try to have the power of forcing someone to come to the table. You've almost just lost them by forcing them to come to the table. So how do we create the space? And this might take a long time, and I'll share a talk that you can listen to talking about the specific idea of like, how can you like over time build trust with a group who have low trust in government or other community groups or whatever it is, so that they can eventually contribute, even though it might not happen in 3 or 6 months. So here's a sort of a few scenarios that maybe each person can pick one. How would you bring these people into the space, and how would you prepare a session for them? So someone who doesn't want to be there, someone who wants to be there but is hesitant, someone who's differently abled, and then someone who's usually quiet and shy. So how would you design a session with these? Like, in what considerations would you have in preparing to facilitate a session? And maybe each person can just pick a number.
I'll start from the top. I want somebody that doesn't want to be there more often than not. In my work specifically, the people that want to be there have an agenda, and it takes a lot to like work against that agenda. I think everybody's got an agenda, but the people that want to be there come in with an idea fully loaded and all that sort of stuff. More often than not, I'm generalizing, but the people that don't want to be there are the ones that when they finally crack open are the ones that have the most to share, I find, or are the ones that are most open-minded to listening and get inspired and get engaged. But this still falls back on my, almost all of these do, meet them where they are kind of methodology of, I look for, if you're, rather than having a group discussion about things, you're having people write things on Post-its and put them up there. Even people that don't want to put stuff up there are putting something up there, and it's getting considered and it's getting talked about. And if we're using those sort of, we're not using no, we're using yes and or yes but responses, then that person is getting drawn in and engaged with all of their inputs. And so I think it just naturally, I've seen them get stirred up. But whenever I've had the option of this person is dying to get in the door and this person is reluctant, I take the reluctant person every single time.
That's interesting way of thinking about. Yeah, and it is as they call it, it is a generalization, but you're right. Like one of the things that we often sort of design for in workshops is getting people to dump their ideas and expectations up front so that they can be free from them. Cool. Who wants to go next?
Let's go with differently abled. I worked with youth with disabilities for a number of years, and coming with a design, like my newfound design knowledge and empathy. I think, first of all, it's checking in with the person where they're at in terms of advocating for themselves, how much they want to do that, how much they need to do that. But if someone is interested in that, there's a great space for like empathetic design of working with them to create the space. I do say that really carefully because I think it's not everybody's job to always explain their own situation, but it's a fine line. It's a fine line to walk with respect, and that is like truly being empathetic and truly trying to understand and doing everything you can. But I think sometimes people get tired of advocating for themselves all the time. So just being aware of that and walking that line the best as possible.
That's awesome. I have a reflection on that, I think, but I'll share it in a bit. Cold
Yeah, I was just thinking about the last one. Someone who usually is quiet and shy. Like, if you're designing a session for introverts, or maybe how we already do the thing that we jump on Miro to do some session, to give them some creative space. I usually think, that is a good way to open them up a bit more. Not the way you want the session to go, like online, like just by chatting or something, but yeah, just giving them some sort of other tool would help.
Yeah, so creating different channels, I guess, that sort of Dan's reference, which I think is stuck in my mind now, thanks Dan, about partnering up, and people who want to cook can cook together, and people who want to take a walk, they can take a walk together. Yeah. Awesome. I think one of the things that, just as a final reflection, one of the things that I read, I think on Twitter, I tried to find the tweet, but I couldn't. But it was talking about basically especially with people who are not usually engaged, not the usual common suspects, and often for reasons that we're scared, or the government agency or whatever the company is we're working for are scared of engaging these people, whatever it is. One thing that we often as designers do, which this tweet made me realize, is that we ask them to come into the space and we design it and we do everything the right way. And then when they come in, we expect them to be perfect. We expect them to pretend there is no trauma and there is no history and there's no issues there. And I think that was like reading that, I was like, wow, that's crazy. Because like last week when I was sharing the story about the mental health workshops that we were running, and coming face to face with like real conflict where people were crying and walking out of the room and saying, I don't want to be involved in this process anymore. You almost, if you don't know that's what might happen, then you won't design for it, right? Then you'll be caught out. But if you know that, if conflict happened, this is what our plan is, this is what our options are, etc., then all of a sudden you're allowing people to be themselves. You're allowing people to not just dance like the best dance you've ever seen, but dance in their weird way, or dance and then be reminded of their grandmother and how she taught them to dance and cry. So it's so many different expressions that people can contribute with, not just writing down on a post-it note and sitting quietly and listening to the facilitator and things like that. Any reflections on that?
No, I love this. This is usually, like I said, this is where I like to live.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the messy bits. Dan?
Yeah, same as well. This has been my jam. It's been real excitement within design for me, and I love getting practice and diving into some of these tools and philosophies.
Awesome. Kuldeep?
It's been a while that I initiated something, so it's a good chance for me to get back on track. Yeah, like I'm excited to find something that I can take on.
Awesome. Sounds good. So I think this week's challenge is up obviously on the screen, but I think the key action is like to actually schedule time, right? With someone, whatever it is. It might be your partner, it might be a work friend, it might be a friend, it might be a work colleague, whatever it is. Actually schedule time and say, this is the conversation that I want to talk about. We haven't spoken about this for a while, or I noticed this issue or that issue. Let's actually talk about it. And then this week's reading is 4 Orders of Design. It's pretty short. It's an interview with Richard Buchanan, who did the 4 Orders of Design. If you haven't come across it, check it out on Google Images. Just type 4 Orders of Design, Richard Buchanan. Pretty interesting concept, and one that I've been reflecting on quite a bit this week. Awesome. So that's our session for today. Any thoughts or reflections on how today went, or things that we can improve as well? Happy to take anything, or you can send it in the chat or email, whatever it is.
Put a video in the chat. About 2 months ago or so, we had Christina Milan speak to our design org. She is a paraplegic designer that has a design consultancy that is made up of disabled designers. And all they do is design for accessibility, essentially. It's phenomenal. She was mind-blowing. So that's just a quick video, but find her articles and other stuff she's done. Her whole philosophy is that there's no such thing as handicapped, just people that can't operate in certain environments that are not designed for accessibility. Thinking about it that way, my wife is handicapped when it comes to getting things off top shelves in the kitchen. It's absolutely, it rings true, and it's changed the way that we're approaching a lot of things in terms of accessibility now. But yeah, she's really mind-blowing.
That's awesome. And can you share it in Slack as well, Kyle? I'm going to definitely watch this and then try to find a longer video where she talks more about it. But yeah, thanks for sharing. I haven't come across her before, actually. Awesome. Any other reflections? Dan, Kuldeep?
Yeah, just going back on some of the things I wrote down. I love what sticks out with me is the I want someone who doesn't want to be there. I like that in terms of inclusivity, but it also is, I don't know, it just rings true to me from experience, and it's often people who really think. One of the things that I always love is almost always people who say oh, that was a bad idea. Never mind. It's actually some of the best ideas. Often, so often. No, really, that was gold. So yeah, I like that a lot, and that's a fun way to accept the challenge of people who don't want to be there.
That's interesting. I love that. Yeah, I love that our sessions are moving more from. This is a feeling. I don't know. You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I feel like our sessions lately have become more many to many learning as opposed to one to many learning, which I'm trying to do more of, because I think like hearing different perspectives and different lessons. Like I want to learn. I don't want to just share my thoughts and that's it. So I've been really enjoying that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I feel that happening.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, just I really like the one before I attended, like we had some activities on Miro, but like this one, like you kept it precise and short and simple. Yeah, really love the part where you spoke about inclusivity and diversity. So perfect examples. Yeah, I'm trying to like understand a bit more about how I can put these intakes into my work.
Awesome. It's good to have you again, Kuldeep. So this is the video that I was referring to earlier. It's called Learning to Listen Again. It's by CPI, which is the organization that Thea works for. Thea Snow, if you were here for that session. But Jerome talks about how he actually helps design and facilitate conversations in low trust settings, so with communities who don't trust the government. So really interesting and like super cool to hear someone talk about why it is that they're in that space.
Yeah.
Awesome. I will share those links anyway on Slack.